Well, we are
Interesting.
at the full hour and even 1 minute over, so I will get us started. Welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group. My name is Morten Elvang, and Marc, it's a real pleasure to have you here. We met online like many people do these days, and what I really appreciate is that when I started dipping my toes in the waters of strategy, actually years ago, you were one of the first people not only to reach out and ask me what I'm doing, but also to educate me on all the things you thought I'm not doing so well. So I hope you will continue that for a while and don't lose your patience. And today, like for everyone else, the question for you we invited is two things, like where do you see the field going? And we had a short conversation about this just before we started the official part. So for people who are new in this area, potentially like an agile coach, internal change agent, someone who is in the middle of the organization and normally a victim of strategy, how could a person like that actually start to engage more and get more traction on this topic?
Okay, cool.
We'll use for the next 30 minutes, so please take us away.
Yeah, cool. Well, so thanks for the invitation, Morten, and thanks all of you for taking the time to be with us. Now, I just got a couple of slides to illustrate or visualize a little bit what I'm talking about, and yeah, just to set some context, which is also going to help to maybe understand better where I'm coming from and how I actually think about strategy. I wanted to give you a little bit of my background story, so to say. So I've been doing this for some 20 years, going on, I think it's my 23rd year now that I'm officially working or officially out of business school. And I actually started teaching with strategy. So right after university, so I had a major in strategic management and management control, it was called at the time. And right out of university, I created a training company with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine at the time. And I was teaching strategy. And then obviously, you know, what you learn in university, I mean, it's very, the background of that was a very analytical and a very planning driven approach to strategy, right? So it was very scientific management based, if you like, and a very mechanical view of the world of how strategy works, you know, with creating plans and objectives and having these hierarchies of, you know, you start with a mission and then it goes down into a vision and you have to translate all of that into strategy and then goals and objectives and initiatives and projects and so on and so forth. So that's probably how many of you also learned about strategy. So I did that for a couple of years, you know, really the teaching part. And then I said, well, now let's get some real practice. And I went into strategy execution because I think that most of what I had learned about strategy was really about execution, as I said, with all the planning and the, you know, translating that into budgets and so on and so forth. And when I did that, I learned that so in execution, it didn't work that way. So the world didn't work in that kind of mechanical way that you just set objectives and you have your nice plans and then people get to implement that, right? And you know, when trying to improve the implementation, we would do more plans and we would do more granular objectives, which often then resulted in micromanagement, really, and it still didn't work. So that's when I started to shift my perspective, really, and I looked more into change management, and I began to appreciate and also see organizations more as living organisms, so going away from that mechanical kind of view of organizations and to focus more on the social side of strategy execution, if you like. So really kind of appreciating that or learning somehow that the scientific management approach didn't work and we needed a more social approach, right? And so talking about agile strategy, I think that one of the consequences of seeing organizations as living organisms is that you do it in a more agile way on how you do, for example, change management and how you execute strategy. So although we didn't call it agile at the time because 15 years ago, agile management or agile leadership was not something that was very popular, but you have that more iterative kind of way of how you do things. Right? So, and then I worked in strategy execution for a couple of years, did the change management thing, organizational transformation thing. And then at some point I realized, we're always trying to execute these strategies, and execution often gets a bad rap, while the strategy is good, but the execution sucks. But if you really look at the strategies that we had to execute, you kind of learn that, or very often you saw that the strategy was a bad strategy to begin with. So it was too fluffy, it was too high level, it was not very clear on what the priorities should be. So that's when I started to become more engaged also in designing better strategy. So execution often is not the challenge or not the problem. Execution, many organizations do execution quite well, but you need to have a good strategy to be doing this. Now, yeah, it's just so maybe again for context, most of my work has been with large global organizations, usually with divisions, business units, or country organizations within these larger groups. So 90% of my work is with leadership teams out of these companies, as I said, in different divisions, different business units, helping them nowadays to design strategies and then to activate or implement these strategies. And when it comes to strategy, so I am really interested in the what and the how. What I mean by that is, and I'm going to go a little bit more into the details. So the what is really the content of strategy. So if we say we do strategy or we think about strategy, what is it that we actually think about? And then the how is really the process of strategy. Now, these are just two dimensions, and I'm going to share the others because related to the second question that Morten asked, if you want to be a good strategist, I think you need to have the big picture. But I'm particularly interested into these two pieces. And then when it comes to what strategy is, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, lots of people also on LinkedIn. I mean, there are lots of people who talk about reinventing strategy and reinventing really what strategy means, definitions of strategy, and so on. And I don't think we need to do that. I think we have, I mean, we know what good strategy looks like. The problem very often is that the way we do strategy, so more on the process side, it doesn't give us that good strategy. So if you look at, if you look at the research, you look at studies, the results, they vary, but like 70 to 90% of strategies don't get executed or execution fails. There was the famous strategy and report called the strategy crisis, where like 70+% of leaders, they complain about their strategies not being good enough or not being differentiated enough, and so on and so forth. Now, I don't think that any leadership team or any consultant even sits down with the intention of creating a bad strategy. I mean, but somehow that's what happens, right? If you then have a strategy you present, people complain about it not being good. So that's why I think it's the process, how we do the strategy that we need to look differently at. What I'm also interested in is, I call it here, putting innovation back into strategy. So this whole idea of strategic innovation, business model innovation, and so on and so forth, which to me is really about coming up with more innovative answers to the questions that you need to ask yourself when it comes to strategy. So again, we don't need to reinvent the questions we ask ourselves, but in order to differentiate, in order to create competitive advantage, what strategy ultimately should be about, well, we need to come up with more innovative answers. So it's innovation on the content side, and coming up with these innovative answers also might again require that we have a more innovative or different process on how we work on strategy. Then something that's really important to me is, I call this practical and rigorous profound here. So I'm very application oriented. So I want the stuff that I'm talking about and the stuff that I share also on LinkedIn and that I do with my clients, I want it to be sound and rigorous. So it's not something that I just came up with, but it's really based on rigorous research, not necessarily my research, but in the literature, in the academic literature. Well, I want this to be proof that these things actually work. And then I see my role really with helping leadership teams to apply this stuff and make it actually simple to apply. So it was something that I just heard the other day, and I thought it resonated well with me. I think it was Tony Robbins who said that complexity is the enemy of execution. So if something is too complex, I mean, we won't do it, right? There's actually the other research that I came across which says that if change requires more than 1% of your time, it's not going to work. You're not going to do it, right? So we want to make it easy to actually implement. So that's what I kind of strive for. So it should be rigorous, but it should be easy and simple to do. And then, as I said, so I see organizations as living organisms, and not as machines, which then also has an implication on how you see strategic management and what you think is possible from a leadership side, from a consultant side, and what is not possible to do in an organization. So that's kind of like, yeah, where I come from. Now, how I think about strategy, my point of view. So I think to do good strategy, you need these three things. So first of all, we need to have a clear definition of what is strategy. So in any organization, if you ask 5 people, you're probably going to have 6 different answers on what strategy is, which obviously is going to make it difficult to implement it or to do any kind of strategy, to know what we are actually talking about. So we need a clear definition. Then, as I said earlier, a structured framework for thinking about strategy. So this is really the content. And good. And all of this that I just spoke about, it's happening in the context. Now, again, all of this is happening in the context. Now, we can talk about organizational context. We can talk about an industrial or a larger environment. And also quite important, I think getting more important again is that international context where with Trump, we see maybe lots of changes on an international level. So these 3 things, I don't talk too much about the context. Others focus more on that, but again, it's important to kind of keep in mind. Now, when it comes to the definition of strategy, I go with this. I think it's very established also in the literature and the research. So strategy as the answer to the challenges on the journey to achieving your ambitions. Now, this definition has been made where he came up with this idea or he made it popular. Roger Martin also picked up on this idea of strategy is all about solving challenges. Most recently, Peter Compo was on here in one of the meetups, so he obviously also focuses a lot on that. Now, although it has become more popular in the last 10 years or so, this is not something new. Right? So that's something, I think most people don't know probably, but I'd like you to be aware of. Strategies about solving challenges is not something that's new. In fact, I've got here one of my favorite books, which I can highly recommend, is Strategy by Bob DeWitt. So this is an academic textbook. This is the 7th edition. The first edition is from 1999, and they spoke already about, or they used that definition at the time, that strategy is about solving strategic challenges. And the whole book is actually based on what they call an issue-based perspective on strategy, where they say, well, strategy is about solving different types of challenges and strategic choices you have to make, and then they outline the different perspectives to doing it. So this is not new. This is a well-established definition of strategy. And again, I don't think we need to reinvent that. I just go by that. Then we got strategic challenge. Just to finish that. Now, a strategic challenge does not necessarily have to be something negative. So it's not really a problem. So think about it in a more neutral sense. So how to seize an opportunity that could also be a challenge, right? So it's really just a set of circumstances, we might say, that require you to reconsider your course of action. So whenever your strategy is not producing the results anymore that you'd like to see, then you might need to reconsider your course of action and reconsider your.
Yeah.
You good now?
Yes.
I was talking about this idea of how to combine the long-term view with your shorter-term view with a focus on these strategic challenges, right? So, and here this is from John Hagel, who talks about zooming out into the future. So you kind of zoom out into the future. What is your ambition in 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years? But then, also in the spirit of being agile, you zoom back into today and you focus on the challenges ahead of you for the next 12 to 18 months. And once you have solved these challenges, then you go on to, in an agile way again, to take on whatever is next, and what is the next step that brings you closer to your ambition. So in that sense, you stay agile for what is coming at you. Now, when it comes to the framework or the structured way of thinking about strategy, now obviously every organization is going to have its own strategic challenges that it needs to solve. But there is also a set of what I call these foundational strategic questions. And the questions and the choices you have to make when it comes to strategy depends really a lot on what strategy are we talking about. So if we say strategy, very often we mostly, when people say strategy, they think about the business strategy level, but there's other levels of strategy, right? And each of these levels comes with its own strategic issues that you need to solve, and it comes with its own strategic choices that you have to make, right? So on a network strategy level, for example, so the question here is, do you align your strategy with other people in your ecosystem? And how do you design your strategy so that you can design the ecosystem? So the question here is really, where do you compete? Where do you collaborate? Why? So if you think about airline alliances, for example, it's an example of network strategy. They align on leveraging resources. They align on some of the activities with using the same frequent flyer programs, for example. They don't necessarily align on strategic positions, but they kind of align their strategy so that they can leverage resources, they can leverage inventory and collaborate. On the corporate strategy level, the key questions you have to answer is, so what businesses do you want to be in? And the key choice here is, do we want to be or build a portfolio of integrated companies, or do we want to build a portfolio of diversified companies? So that's the key strategic choices that you have to make here. And then with that, so if you say, well, we have that portfolio, comes questions around how do we want to manage the portfolio, more control, less control? Do we want to impose more standards, more synergies, or do we want to give the businesses more freedom so they can do pretty much whatever they want or be more responsive to what's happening in the market? So that's corporate level strategic decisions that you make. And then for each of the businesses within your corporate portfolio, so to say, you have to make choices around your business strategy. And this is really, how do we compete in these businesses? So who is the customers we target? What is the product and the product and service offering we have? How are we going to differentiate? How are we going to make money? What are the capabilities we need? And so on and so forth. So most of the strategy frameworks that we come across, like Playing to Win or the Strategy Diamond, for example, they really act on that business strategy level. And then on the last kind of level, or the final layer, you have the functional or department level strategy. So this is really about contributing. How does the marketing, HR, finance, production, what have you, how does that really contribute to the functional level strategy? So, and then the final piece here is the process. So how are you doing strategy? And well, I spoke about it earlier. So the traditional way is kind of that first we analyze, then we develop, then we plan the execution, then we execute, and then we kind of monitor. And what I actually also learned in my work and in my research is that good strategies are really kind of crafted. Right? So Mintzberg called it crafting strategy. So it's really an iterative, and again, where agile comes into play, an agile process of you make sense of what is going on, you make a decision about what should be our next action, you take action, that action actually gives you results, and then based on these results, you have to make sense of them again, and you go into the next loop. And in my research and in my books, I have written quite a lot about case studies illustrating how strategies were really crafted by going through these cycles of making sense, making decisions, taking action, looking at the results, and so on and so forth. Right? So if you think about it this way, then strategy or strategizing, the process of strategy is really 3 different types of activity. So it's really about identifying the challenges. Well, it could be a threat or an opportunity. You need to formulate a response, and then you need to take action, which is also, if you're talking about new development in strategy, so a big topic in the academic field of strategy is dynamic capabilities. So that's kind of for the last 10 years. And this is what the dynamic capabilities are all about. So it's all about identifying the need for change, as they call it often, formulating a response to that, and then implementing a course of action. And I deliberately show this as a circle because it's not something that you kind of go through just once, but it's something that goes on all the time and in parallel. So once you start implementing maybe on some parts of the organization, then another part of the organization is already again in this what is the problem kind of thinking, as I illustrated here, and then you go through these iterative cycles. Now, here's the process I use. You need to start somewhere. So here's kind of like the 9 steps that I take when I start. So it's about identifying the problems, identifying opportunities, and then prioritizing which ones do we attack, where do we focus, and then developing options, usually for strategy, because that just enhances also the quality, which we need to test and validate somehow, and we can talk about that. Before you make a choice, then here's the one we want to go for, and then you make sure that you get results, prioritizing or defining strategic moves, aligning the organization, which is really then on the functional level where you start to align what the organization does to the overall strategy, and then you want to have kind of like a regular system in place that helps you to manage your strategy. So strategy is really kind of this trinity here of, you know, making sense, making decisions, and taking action, which is going to lead, as I said, to results that help you to make sense. So that's high level how I think about strategy. Now, to the second question, how to engage with strategy, and the way I thought about it is how to become a better strategist. Now, first of all, you need to see the big picture. So if we talk about strategy, if I talk about strategy, I talk about different pieces in this big picture. And most of us do. I can give some examples with the people from the meetup, from the recordings that I watched, but it's really, we are in one of these buckets. But the full picture is about the content of strategy, it's about the process of strategy, it's about the context in which strategy happens, and it's also about, I call this the purpose here, is really about the input of the strategy. It's also something that I, in my work, for example, don't talk much about, because I just take this as a given. So whatever the company has as its objective, as its ambition, I work with that, and I'm not there to convince them that their purpose should be something else. So to be a good strategist, recognize there is a good picture. And as I said, usually if you hear somebody talk about strategy, they talk about one or the other of these buckets. So I spoke about the framework, I spoke about the process. Who else was here? Well, Peter Combo talks a lot about the definition of strategy as challenge-based. He talks a little bit about the process. He doesn't talk much about the content, for example. He doesn't talk much about, he talks a little bit about the context, not too much though. Dave Snowden spoke about strategy being dynamic. He spoke about decentralized decision-making. That's really talking about the process. He also said strategy is political, and he talked about that he's now very interested in the beliefs of the people in the organization and the impact that has on strategy, which is really talking about the organizational context. Patrick spoke about really the industry or the network level. If you think about it here, he talked about industry or larger ecosystem, a little bit about the ecosystem content. And although, I mean, talking about beliefs, Patrick has a very strong belief that he found the holy grail for strategy. It's really just one part of the puzzle, right? He doesn't talk much about the process. In the book, there's a short chapter. He doesn't talk about purpose. He doesn't really talk about definition, right? He's really in that industry bucket. So when you hear somebody talk about strategy, recognize that, well, they talk about one piece of this, and the way they talk about it, the way I talk about it, it's based on strong beliefs we have, right? And our beliefs might be, it's our worldview, it's our history, but for every belief, there is also a counter belief. Right? If I say strategy is crafted, somebody else, we have Tom here, who says in his slides, it was strategy is not crafted, strategy is engineered. So you always have people who have one perspective or the other perspective. Talking about industry context, if you think about something like 5 forces, it's based on the belief that the industry is given and that you have to adjust your strategy. And the industry, the choice of the industry is actually going to make you profitable or not. If you take something like Blue Ocean Strategy, it's based on the belief, there's a whole chapter, only in the appendix, unfortunately, but the whole chapter about what they call the reconstructionist view of the industry. So the belief that you can shape the industry and you don't have to fit your strategy to the industry. So you see that for every one of these buckets, there's different ways on how to answer the challenges and how to make the choices when it comes to strategy. And there are different perspectives to that. So to be a good strategist, you should also be aware of these different perspectives. And you should think about, what is my perspective? Really? What is your belief? What is your mental model for how you look at that? And again, the book that I mentioned earlier, that's why I love this book so much, is because it doesn't take a particular perspective, but it illustrates the issue, and then it outlines what are the different perspectives out there that you can use to answer the challenge. So that would be my first recommendation. So think about the big picture if you want to be a better strategist. And the second element, if you really want to be better at strategy in your particular job today, and this you can do no matter where you are, is to kind of train your strategic reasoning skills. So this idea of, so how do you identify really problems that you should be focusing on? So problems that really make a difference when it comes to your business. How can you better understand these problems? How can you conceive, formulate, imagine new strategies to solve these problems? And then how can you make sure that the actions you take are aligned to the strategy so that you solve the problems? So to be a good strategist, I mean, you have to be good in all these different areas. And yeah, just to close, I have a short little ebook here that kind of outlines the stuff that I just spoke about. So if you want to read up on that, it's free. You can download it at makebetterstrategy.com. Good, Morten, that was it.
Thank you, Marc. Really appreciate it.
My kind of, how I think about strategy.
That's good. So, and really sorry about that thing that happened. Never tried anything like this before, so I need to study how to get rid of this. I hope it was not distracting you too much.
No, that's okay. It's okay. We managed.
Well, to the two questions, I think you covered them really well, and I was probably a little bit distracted. But if you should, in a way, summarize, what do you see as the big trend at the moment? I mean, where are things going?
Well, so what I see from customers at least is they are more interested in, or they want to go away from that, what I would call traditional strategic planning. So I have customers who say, look, Marc, can we do it in a more practical way? We don't want to do all that analysis anymore upfront. We really want to design the strategy and then rather test it instead of doing too much analysis upfront. So that is something that I definitely see. And then also the willingness to be more agile when it comes to doing strategy. So this idea that, we don't have to have the full picture or complete plan once we start, but it's really it's okay to learn as we go along. So we have a key idea for who we want to target, what we want to offer, but then we figure out the details while we are doing it. So that's a second trend that I see with companies. And maybe a third trend that I see also is the willingness to engage more people in the entire process. So instead of doing, I always talk about do strategy or don't do strategy behind boardroom doors, right? But in the open. And I see more willingness from organizations also to do that very often, because they have realized obviously that there was a lot of good knowledge in the company, and the question is how to harness that. And I also think that when it comes to then activating strategies afterwards, the more you engage the organization throughout the process, the easier it's going to be for executing the strategy. Which doesn't mean that everybody has a say in what the strategy should be, right? But there are different ways on how to get feedback, for example, or how to involve them to generate ideas around what are the challenges, what could be strategic elements of our strategy. Also, I see more willingness there. So that's maybe on the practical side. While on the academic side, the big focus for the last 10, 15 years has been this idea of dynamic capabilities, which is very dominant in the whole strategy literature, and then the application of dynamic capabilities to various areas in your business. And still, it's still very, and that's also, one of these beliefs and these contradictory tensions, if you like. Is strategy outside in or inside out? Right? Do you start with what the market wants and then you think about what do we do, or do you start with your strengths and your capabilities? And I mean, dynamic capabilities and the academic literature is very dominated by the resource-based view, so that you kind of start with the resources and then think about what you can do with that.
Thank you. Let's open it up for people on the line. Any questions, comments?
No, everything's clear. Well, let me ask a question then maybe. So how does it resonate what I spoke about? Or is it, what was maybe challenging your beliefs? I mean, talking about beliefs, talking about mental models, where do you feel confirmed and where do you feel challenged?
Maybe to start, I think some interesting points and very matching very well with my last experience is definition of what a strategy is. Seems stupid, but it's in reality something which is not clear for most of the organizations I've contacted, and then the idea of not too much analysis, but sufficient analysis to, let's say, to define or to set a sense of direction, and then learn by doing within the time. Yeah, I think this is the most important thing nowadays. Yeah. And the question is that now the context requires this. In the past, it was maybe not so significant because in many industries the context was not demanding this agility or this responsiveness of the organizations. Now is becoming a critical question.
Yeah, so that's well, this context element is obviously becoming more important in kind of like two ways, I think. So the first way is that traditional idea of long-term strategic planning, where you break everything down into objectives and goals and so on and plans, and then as we all know, what good is it to plan now what we want to do in 5 years? We don't know what's going to happen in next year, right? So there's not really any use of that. So that's one element. The other element, though, is also, and again, that's in the research. If you are in a very turbulent environment, very often the excuse is we don't need a strategy because things change so often. In fact, just before this call, I wasn't on the call with a startup, and they said, "Well, things change so quickly. Why do we need a strategy?" Well, again, there's proof in the literature and the research that specifically in high turbulent environments, a formal written down strategy helps to have better performance, right? Because it gives you a sense of direction, it gives you a sense of focus and priorities. And again, the question is, how do you think about strategy? If you think about strategy as this rigid plan, then obviously in a high turbulent environment, that's going to be challenging, right? But if you think about strategy as, well, we have challenges that we need to solve, we have our ambition, and we're going to work challenge by challenge to get there, then that helps in a turbulent environment. Tom asked about results that I cited in the book. So in the ebook, I think I talk about some cases where was a Danish company actually where we improved revenues by 50% over 12 months. So we worked on the strategy. We actually took a very agile approach there. So we because they wanted to see results quickly, or the owner actually wanted to see results quickly. So they also said, well, we don't have time for like 3 months of analysis and then 6 months of strategy development. So we need to do stuff really rapidly. So what we did actually is in the first workshop, we set objectives. So, okay, what is the ambition? Where do you want to be end of the year? And where do you want to be in 3 years? And then we talked about, so what are strategic moves that are clear for everybody? We don't really need to discuss them. It's clear that they need to happen. What are open questions where we don't really know how to answer them or how to address them? And what are challenges and opportunities that we need to also explore? Right? And then we have these 3 kind of buckets, and then we worked in sprints. So we split up the management team, and they were 6, if I remember well. And then we had pairs, and they worked on 1 or 2 of these things. and we just worked through them in sprints. So we implemented the first moves, and those moves led to quite quickly results. And at the end of the year, we kept on working through these sprints, implement what had to be implemented. We kept on discussing stuff that was unclear or questions that needed to be explored in these monthly sprints. It was actually, and at the end of the year, revenues and profit had gone up by 50%. So I'm not talking 1 million to 1.5 million, but I'm talking 20 million to 30 million. So that's an example of results that we achieved with this more agile approach, without too much planning up front, without all the analysis up front, but we kind of went along, right? Which is also, so, talking about analysis, in my experience, if you ask a management team, and if you even involve a little bit more people in the organization, and you ask them about what is going on in the market, what opportunities do you see, what trends do you see, what challenges do you see, they know this pretty well, right? And the analysis, sometimes we have that, so the team doesn't know it pretty well, we write it down and then say, we should get some market research to kind of confirm. But then 90% of what the market research tells you, they knew it, right? So we could have started doing it immediately. So it's very often more a kind of not being confident enough of why we need all that analysis and all that market research, but the company and the team knows actually pretty well what's going on.
Mark, one of the things.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, Dennis, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, one of the things that have been paying a lot of attention to in the last several years in that area is making the assumptions about strategy very explicit and measurable, and then starting to execute and testing your assumptions and steering when you're off, rather than spending a year or 6 months making the plan, just start executing against it.
Right.
But figure it out.
Yeah, so that's the idea. I think also Roger Martin talks about this a lot in his process, that this is based on the assumption, or based on that approach, that you design your strategy. So you design it, and then afterwards you have to validate whether your assumptions actually work, right? So then, which means that more of the analysis comes after the strategy instead of before the strategy.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I also, when talking about I don't actually talk about analysis. I talk more about, it's about making sense what's going on, right? And every leadership team is going to make different sense of what's going on in their context. If you have a different CEO, they interpret things differently. So again, that's why, it's not an exact science anyhow, right? You have a leadership team which at this point in time is going to make sense of what is happening in a particular way. And there is no right or wrong way actually to do it, right? And then based on that, actually take decisions. Now, the decisions you take might be right or wrong, but making sense of what's going on, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do that. And then, as you said, Danny, so then you have these assumptions which you want to test, right? And I really I usually go with kind of like the big buckets of design thinking. So you want to test for desirability. We believe that people want this. Do they actually want this, right? And very often it's enough just to, depending again on what you do and the type of your business, but maybe you just call 5 potential clients and you ask them, so what do you think about when we do this? And then you see what they say, right? If everybody says, we're not sure, then you might need to do some more work. If you have 5 who say, yes, this is great, then, well, that's already a good validation. Right? So you want to test desirability. You obviously want to test feasibility. Can we do it? Do we have the resources? Do we have the capabilities? If we don't have them, how difficult is it to get them? Do we have the money that we could get them? So that's more the feasibility part. And then the last bit is the viability part, or design thinking calls it viability. So does it make sense from a business perspective that we should be doing this? Right? And sometimes that might need some business planning. You might need to calculate some business cases, but also there, very often, or I remember a workshop where, so we were discussing an idea and for a product, and quite lengthy discussion, and I was losing a little bit my patience because we didn't get to a result. And then I said, okay, let's just do a quick back of the envelope calculation whether this makes any sense or not. And I just took a flip chart and we calculated, okay, how many of these do you think that you can sell? What's the price that you think you can get? What's the margin you think you could make out of it? And then we already had a number. We say, well, this doesn't make sense to discuss any further because we don't think there's any potential in the market. Or even if there was, we can't sell more than X, and that's never going to be enough to get us to the ambitions that we set. So again, all these tests don't have to be very complicated. It doesn't have to be a lot of market research and hundreds of Excel sheets or whatever. It can be quite simple actually to do it.
We had a question from Ken in the notes. I don't know if you want to pick it up yourself, Mark.
Challenge identification, selection, structuring, etc. Yeah. So again, I try to be very pragmatic. So the first thing is really just asking. So what are the big challenges that you have, and then you see what the team or what the company comes up with. Then I have a little technique I call strategy triage, where I look at I look at 2 dimensions actually. So I look at whether the challenge impacts the entire organization or only a part. So if it's just something that's related to HR only or to marketing only, then that's part, and it doesn't maybe not affect the entire organization. And the second thing I look at is whether it threatens the survival of your company or not. So is it a problem so big that it could actually break down your company, or is it an opportunity so big that if you missed it, you're going to be out of business in 3 years or whatever? And then we prioritize the challenges that way and then go about solving them. I actually have let me put it into the chat. Let's see what I find it quickly. I have an article on my website where I talk about this strategy triage.
I think for me, the sort of challenge selection or identification is quite critical to where you put your efforts, I think. So it's kind of...
Yes, obviously, yeah. And just by the nature, I guess, of personal or nature of us people, if you ask a management team, everybody first is likely to come up with stuff that's only in their area of responsibility, right? And then it's really, so what we do in the discussions is really try to see, so what is really so big that it kind of has a meaning, an impact on the entire organization, and what is really just a functional or department kind of thing.
Okay.
But it is really, yeah, it's again, I don't have an exact science yet on how to do that. It really depends a lot. And, very often the first challenge is actually that the core strategy is not really clear. So the where to play, how to win, if you like, is not very clear. So that's kind of like the first challenge that we need to solve, to get clarity around that. And then there comes other challenges with execution and stuff, but very often that's the first challenge. Right? And then the second challenge very often is about if your core strategy is clear, it's about how to make it work, right? And it needs tweaking to make it work. Right? Actually, I use Netflix often as an example for how they use challenge-based strategy really to develop their whole strategy along the way with the DVDs already. Actually, I learned some new stuff about the DVD challenges. So, for example, when Netflix started out, so they did the DVD. I mean, we all know they shipped the DVDs, but one of the major challenges was that it took them a long time to break even on each DVD because they had to ship them. They had to ship them that took like 2-3 days to get to the viewer, and then it took 1-2 days where they viewed it, and then where they watched the DVD, and then 2-3 days to come back. So a DVD is actually gone for like 10 days. Whereas with Blockbuster, you rented the DVD today and you return it tomorrow. So in 10 days, they can actually rent it out 10 times, which Netflix didn't or wasn't possible, right? And that's how they came up with the subscription model. So that's kind of, the challenge that they needed to solve to make this DVD rental model work in the beginning. And there are plenty of that. So actually, if you download the guide, it's going to come with a couple of emails, and in one of those, there's a video where I explained this challenge-based approach for Netflix.
Okay, thank you.
I think Aaron has a hand up here. Any question, Aaron?
Yes, no, thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I work now the last 3-4 years in this sort of intersection of sales and sales enablement and the strategic planning, and that tends to get locked into this very shorter cycle of forecast to plan, to be blunt, let's say weaker. I mean, it's questionable to even call it strategy, but let's just say they try to have some true norths. But those true norths really consolidate down to margin, key account growth. Those real basics that don't seem high. They're not differentiating. Let's just be honest, but they are really almost operational necessities. And then when there's a VUCA challenge that hit, example right now being sort of the tariff freeze that everyone's in right now, that no one's talking about like that, but that's basically what it is. Everyone's just staying sort of BAU. They're not over hiring or hiring. They're not over investing or investing. It's just everyone's waiting and seeing. You then just have compression that occurs, right? Because you're not extending, you're not advancing, you're not going to market in an aggressive way or whatever. How do you square, the sort of strategy circle with organizations? Because I know the one I work for and others that are like this are not that novel when it comes to this, who get into this shorter term, we'll just say lots of 12 to 18 months, forecast to plan to business development to growth. And then when all that's done, all that is reconciled, whatever's left over, little pieces, becomes actually part of real strategy, right? Investment, right? That extra 1%, 2%, 3% that's out there. But it's not this, startup, shift the needle, hockey stick kind of operating environments. It's lots of, tactical, at best, tactical shifts. And if you're lucky, one of those balloons out into something. I hope that makes some sense. But I'm giving you kind of like a BAU world.
So I think the first thing that I would try to do is kind of decouple the strategy discussion from the sales planning, really, that you spoke about, right? And make clear that, okay, yeah, you have the sales plan, but that's not your strategy. And so let's decouple the discussion, right? So we have a strategy discussion, and then you have the sales planning and forecast discussion, which obviously is important. Right? So decouple these two things and don't mix them up. I talk a lot about this idea, planning is not strategy, and that's actually what I mean, that you confuse the planning part with the strategy part. Both are important, but as Mintzberg also said, strategy is not the result of planning, it's a starting point. So first you have the strategy, and then you come with the plan. Right? So that's the first thing I would do. Then, to make it more strategic, what I look at on the functional level are two things. So the first thing is, I want to make sure that whatever, like sales, for example, is spending its time with or on is aligned to the business strategy. So an easy example, if the strategy says we want to grow in customer segment B, but sales spends 90% of its time chasing customer segment A, then how we spend our time is not aligned with the strategy. So I would look at that, right? So I would look at, what are the activities that you're doing? How are you spending your time? And is that really aligned to the overall strategy? And then the second thing is, the second thing I do is I look at, again, strategy as solving challenges. So on the sales level, I would also say, what are really our challenges when it comes to sales? And then base the strategy on how are we going to solve these challenges. So maybe it is access to a customer, maybe it's resources, maybe it's too complicated sales process, whatever it might be, right? But then really focus on these things.
Great. No, thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. Oh, it was valuable.
Approaching the end, there was one question from Tom that we didn't pick up on, which, if I read it, please tell me more about setting objectives clearly.
Yeah, setting objectives clearly. So my first thing is that, as I said, whatever the company says is my objective, I go with that, right? So we're talking about ambition. Well, if the company says we want to grow by 20% our top line, then okay, we go into the details. What does that mean in terms of maybe profitability and stuff, or by when and how and how? But then I roll with that. So I don't really question that kind of objective, right? And then, breaking it down afterwards. So again, the forecast and the planning, like we just discussed with Aaron, for me, that doesn't have anything really to do with strategy, right? So we don't need to have forecasts in the sense of these sales objectives, for example, or stuff like that. Now, if we say, well, we need to acquire new customers, then maybe we set an objective in the sense of how many do we think that we can get in the next 6 months, or how many do we need, and what kind of revenue and what kind of margin, so that we can make a profit. So we set these kind of things, but usually, yeah, I leave that more to the salespeople, and it's not so central to my strategy work.
I was actually thinking, so you also mentioned that it becomes more dynamic, which means that there's a higher likelihood that something changes after you have deliberated. So if that's going to happen, does that actually give a bigger concern from a strategy perspective on the other activities? I mean, traditionally you have excluded a lot from strategy because you have called that operation. But is it, for example, a concern if there is a healthy balance between operation and capacity for innovation? Or do you think of that as something being outside what you would call strategy? And the question is that as things change and become more dynamic, maybe to the point you made earlier of the big picture of strategy, you need to actually have a more holistic view to the whole thing.
I'm not sure I understand correctly what you're saying, but I think so. Once you have the business strategy, obviously you need to then break it down into that, or cascade it. We call, I'm not happy with the word, but align the functional strategies to your overall strategy, right? And to your point about operations, for example, so to me, again, it is really about aligning the activities that you perform to the strategy, right? So that ideally, I mean, there shouldn't be any gap between this is our strategy and this is our operations and our daily work, right? Because, I mean, your daily work should be your strategy. Otherwise, what are you doing, right? So if these two things are not aligned, right? And then when it comes to, I mean, you're talking about so innovation. Question here is really, for example, so if we say innovation, do we have space for innovation? Innovation then should be aligned again to whatever you have in your strategy. So as an easy example, if you, or an easy way to decide on different positionings is the 3 value propositions from Versima and Trout, right? So there is customer intimacy, there is operational excellence, and then there is product leadership. Now, if you say, well, we position ourselves on product leadership, then obviously innovation is a core capability that should go into product leadership, right? If you say we position ourselves on operational excellence and you have innovation, well, then innovation should not be about products, but it should be about operational excellence. Like Amazon does a lot of innovation. It doesn't change the book that we buy, right? But it's more on the operational excellence that they do the innovation, right? So then that kind of, again, you need to align that to your strategy.
Then you asked a little bit earlier, and I wanted to give everybody space to say what resonated with us. And I think, Marc, 2 things I have seen from you that's really staying with me is the levels of strategy that you presented. I think that's really useful because one of the myths, and I'm not saying anybody really believes that, but there is this myth that there's only one strategy, and there clearly isn't, right? It's a multiple levels, multiple contexts. So I appreciate that. And then I think the big picture you presented was useful, where you could somehow contextualize some of the previous presentations. So I found that really valuable.
Yeah, so I think that's
doing that.
Yeah, I think that's an important one. Just to keep that in mind, that most of us, me included, right, we just talk about one piece of the elephant, if you like to use Mintzberg's analogy, right? So you know, he spoke about the blind man and the elephant. That everybody's just talking about one piece, and we still do that, right? Everybody has their preference, their interests, and that's the piece we talk about, right? But as good strategies, at least you should be aware of the big picture, and you should be aware that in every one of these dimensions there is contradictory views and perspectives on how to do it, right? Some say strategy needs to be creative, some say strategy should be analytical, right? So it's kind of like contradicting perspectives, and then obviously that, I mean, or
so Aaron, I think I'm gonna
might lie with the synthesis, right?
Aaron, I'm gonna wrap us up, but then if Marc has time, we can stay a little bit longer.
Yeah, I can stay on. Yeah, no problem.
I wanted to thank everybody.
Just to mention that there was a question about this book, so I just put it into the chat as well. So it's Strategy by Bob de Wit. If you want to, I would wait like 2-3 months because the 8th edition is going to come out. I don't think it's going to change a lot, but the 8th edition should come out in March, April, something like that.
That's a good hint. So for everybody who has to leave now, Marc, thanks a lot for doing this. My editing job is a little bit harder than normal. I'll see how I figure that up. But other than that, hope to see you next time. And if you have time, let's stay on, but let's also.
Yeah, I have time. I'm happy to stay on.
So Aaron, please.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. So I wanted to sort of follow up on that conversation that you were having around the decoupling and the linkage of strategy to operationalization and the execution. What I have seen pretty consistently in my career is that the strategy piece is fairly decoupled from the operational management.
Yeah.
And what I used to think, I mean, when I was, I guess, more junior or mid-ish in my career at that point, was that this was just, sort of a mistake, right? That people were really, they didn't know what they were doing, whatever. And what I realized is that the incentives are radically different, right? So you have at the operational and the execution level, typically very hard-coded incentives around sales and growth, or around product and excellence, quality, whatever, the quality delivery, the whole ecosystem around whatever it is, if it's professional services or coupled services with product, etc. And then the strategy piece, in a lot of ways, I've rarely seen what I would call real incentive. This is like targets. It's just a lot of sort of true north, blue ocean-y, green, brown, kind of ocean goals. And they a lot of times just get eye rolled as you move down, because they're mismatched at the operational level. So that people say, hey, that's great, but that doesn't fit in my incentive plan, or that doesn't fit in my managerial plan, or that's not, not just my boss, but like our division, our BU, whatever, is aligned with. And that mismatch just sort of just lays out there, like the crazy uncle at the holiday party that everyone just wants to get past, and and hope they leave to go to someone else's party, and that's it, right? And then you kind of come up with these get around statements every time you do a review, this sort of half-baked response that everyone just knows is not authentic. And I've just seen this play out, and I've worked in some fairly successful companies in my career, and everyone just seems to not be able to square this pretty consistently. And I'm believing it just has more to do with the incentives, that I've never consistently seen incentives coming out of the strategy side, that just makes any business sense. And the people are great; they're smart. I mean, they bring in great people, best people. All the things tend to add up, but they don't link. The incentives don't seem to be linked. And the only thing I can come to a conclusion is that those true north incentives, they can't create enough capital to really link, because they'd have to be taking away from the operationalized incentives, and that's a war, right? That's a BU department divisional war. That's sort of my simplistic take. But anyways, hopefully that made some sense.
Well, I mean, but that's the big challenge of strategy execution, right? I mean, we talk about strategy execution being so difficult, and in my experience, there are these two challenges that you just mentioned. So the first one is that strategy is always seen as something on top, right? Now, well, we have our day-to-day business, now we come with strategy. So that's a gap that you need to close, because again, strategy, I mean, your daily business should be your strategy. Otherwise, if the two don't fit, you don't do one or the other, right? So you have a strategy on paper, but if nobody does it in the organization, then you have a disconnect. So, and the way to kind of bring these two together is, in my experience, the only way I have found to really make it work is to look at the activities. Just budgets or just resource allocation doesn't help, because then, again, let's stay with the sales example. If they get more resources, they go more after customer A, and they don't switch to customer B. So you need to look at the activities. Looking at the activities in that sense also means that you probably will need to stop some stuff. So that's also a discussion you need to have. It's not we add strategy on top. Well, we need to cut away from some things. Like I'm working with an organization right now. We stopped 17 products. So they had 21, and we went from 21 to 4 that we now focus on, right? because the others, they are not aligned anymore with the strategy. So obviously then we need a mitigation strategy, we need a product life cycle, and we need to maintain it and support it, blah, blah, blah. But we stop all development of these products. Right? So that's then part of the product strategy. How do we deal with those that we discontinue? Right? But you need to have that alignment of how do we spend our time, and is that aligned to the strategy or not? Right? So that's the first thing. Then the second thing you're talking about, I mean, incentives. So this is where you really see whether a leadership team is serious about the new strategy or not. But if they are willing to change these things, right? If they are willing to change the incentives, if they are willing to change the KPIs, the rewards, if they're willing to change maybe the processes behind or not, right? And if they are not willing to do that, then it gets very, very difficult to really, especially if it's a strategic change and it's a larger departure from the old strategy, then it gets really difficult if you're not serious about doing that move. Right?
Yep. No, great. Thank you. That was great.
Sure.
Let's be brave and wrap up. Marc's point.
I still have time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciated that you took time to give your perspective.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah,
Hope
nice
to see
to meet
you
you. Well
for
done.
some of the events.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I put my
Thanks.
my LinkedIn in the chat. If you are interested, then please connect. I also published a webinar that I'm going to do next week on innovation in strategy. So if you're interested in that, be happy to see you there.
Yeah, and Marc, I forgot to ask. I hope I can get your slides. Then I'll make sure they.
Yes, yeah, I'll send you the slides. Yeah.
Either a link where people can download them if you prefer, or you can.
I can send you a PDF and then you can just distribute it.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon again. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.